At 65, she had nowhere left to go until one hidden page revealed a place waiting just for her. The car wouldn't start that morning. Marjorie Ellison sat alone in a quiet parking lot, everything she owned packed into the back seat, the cold settling into her bones. On the seat beside her, wrapped in a faded scarf, was an old Bible she hadn't opened in decades. When she finally did, she found something no one had ever told her, and a map that changed everything. Have you ever found something that made you question everything you thought you knew? The first turn of the key made a sound like a tired cough. Marjorie Ellison paused, her hand still wrapped around the ignition, listening as the engine tried once, then fell quiet again. The cold had settled deep into the car overnight. She could feel it through the seat, through her coat, through the bones of her back. She waited a moment. Then she tried again. This time the engine didn't even pretend. Just a dry click. A hollow, final kind of sound. Marjorie let her hand rest there a second longer, as if holding it might change something. Then she eased the key back and sat still. Outside, the grocery store lights flickered on one by one, humming faintly. A delivery truck idled near the loading dock, its diesel engine rumbling steady and alive. Somewhere to her left, metal shopping carts clattered together as a young employee pushed a long row of them toward the entrance, his breath fogging in the early morning air. The day was starting. Just not for her. She leaned back slowly in the driver's seat, exhaling through her nose. The windshield had fogged up from the inside again. Her breath made a small circle in the glass, then faded. "All right," she murmured, though there was no one to answer. The car smelled faintly of old fabric and something sweet that had long since turned stale. She reached for the paper cup in the holder beside her. The coffee inside had gone cold hours ago, a thin skin forming on top. She took a small sip anyway. It tasted like nothing. In the side mirror, she could see the sky beginning to lighten. Not sunrise yet, just that gray stretch before it, when everything feels paused, suspended. She turned her head slightly, looking into the back seat. Everything she owned was there. 2 plastic bins, a small suitcase with a broken zipper, a rolled-up blanket, a grocery bag stuffed with folded clothes that no longer quite matched the weather, and on the far side, near the door, wrapped carefully in a faded blue scarf, sat the Bible. It looked out of place among the rest of it, too deliberate, too kept. Marjorie reached back and touched the edge of the scarf with her fingers, not unwrapping it, just confirming it was still there. The fabric felt soft from years of handling, worn thin along the edges. She hadn't opened it in years, decades maybe. Still, she kept it close. She couldn't have said why. A car door slammed somewhere across the lot. Voices followed, 2 women talking, their words sharp in the cold air, then fading as they moved toward the store. Another car pulled in, tires crunching lightly over grit and salt. Life moved around her in small, ordinary ways. No one looked her way. Marjorie shifted in her seat, wincing slightly as her lower back tightened. She pressed her palm there, rubbing once, slow and absent-minded, then let her hand fall. She tried the key again. Click. Nothing. This time she didn't wait. She just let her head rest back against the seat and closed her eyes for a moment. It wasn't anger she felt. Not anymore. Anger took energy. What she felt instead was quieter, heavier, like something that had settled in and made a home. She opened her eyes again and stared at the steering wheel, the cracked leather worn smooth where her hands had rested over the years. There had been a time when this car was just a car, a way to get to the store, to visit, to run errands. Now it was everything. Shelter, storage, boundary, a place that kept the world just far enough away. A gust of wind rattled lightly against the side of the car, carrying with it the faint smell of baked bread from the store vents. It drifted in through a small gap in the window and disappeared just as quickly. Marjorie swallowed. She checked the dashboard out of habit. The fuel gauge sat just above empty. The battery light glowed faintly, useless now. The clock blinked the wrong time. She reached for the key again, almost without thinking. Then stopped. Her hand hovered there, then dropped slowly to her lap. "Not today," she said under her breath. It came out calm, almost gentle. Across the lot, the sliding doors of the grocery store opened with a soft, mechanical sigh. Warm light spilled out onto the pavement. A man stepped through, adjusting his coat, carrying a bag of something fresh and warm. Marjorie watched him go. For a moment, she imagined walking in there, just like anyone else, picking up a loaf of bread, maybe a carton of eggs, standing in line, paying, leaving. Simple things, the kind that used to belong to her without thought. She blinked, and the image slipped away. The car was quiet again. She turned slightly, reaching back once more, her fingers finding the edge of the scarf. This time she rested her hand there a little longer, pressing it gently against the shape of the book beneath. Solid. Unchanged. Waiting. She didn't unwrap it. Not yet. Instead, she pulled her hand back, folded it into her lap, and looked straight ahead as the sky shifted from gray to pale blue. The world kept moving. And she sat there, in the stillness between what had ended and whatever might come next, with a car that wouldn't start, and nowhere else to be. A cart rattled past her window, then another. The sound came sharp at first, then softened as it rolled farther away, swallowed by the hum of the parking lot waking up. Marjorie watched the movement without really seeing it, her eyes resting somewhere just beyond the glass. She reached for the cold coffee again, took a sip, and set it back. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. There had been a time, she could remember it clearly, when something like this would have undone her. The car not starting, the quiet certainty that there was no one to call, no place to go. It would have sent her pacing, thinking, trying to fix it all at once. Now she just sat. The stillness had come slowly. Not all at once. That was the strange part. She shifted in her seat and glanced toward the glove compartment. It hung slightly crooked, the latch worn loose. Inside, tucked beneath a folded receipt and a pair of reading glasses, were papers she didn't look at anymore. She didn't need to. She knew what they said. Sign here. Initial here. Standard procedure. Nothing to worry about. Her thumb rubbed lightly against her palm, remembering the feel of the pen, the way she'd nodded along, trusting the voice across the table. It had all seemed so reasonable at the time. Temporary adjustments, just until things settled. Things had never settled. A woman crossed in front of the car, carrying 2 bags, her keys already in her hand. She moved quickly, like she had somewhere to be, somewhere waiting. Marjorie followed her with her eyes until she disappeared behind a row of parked cars. For a moment, a different image slipped in. A kitchen. Late afternoon light falling across the counter, the sound of a cabinet door closing. Someone, her, setting down a plate, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The hum of a refrigerator that worked. A clock ticking somewhere steady and familiar. She blinked. The image broke apart like something fragile. It hadn't happened all at once. That's what people never seemed to understand. It wasn't one moment, one mistake, one bad day. It was smaller than that. Quieter. The marriage had come first. Not the beginning of it, the ending. She could still see the way he had sat across from her at the table. Not angry, not loud, just calm. Papers already prepared, words already chosen. "It's cleaner this way," he'd said. Cleaner. She hadn't argued. Not really. She'd been too busy trying to understand what had already been decided without her. Later she would learn about the accounts, the transfers, the things that had been moved, adjusted, shifted into places she didn't know to look. But at the time she'd signed where she was told. Trust has a way of doing that. She let out a slow breath and leaned her head back again. Then came the calls, or rather, the absence of them. Her son's number still sat in her phone, unchanged. She hadn't deleted it, couldn't bring herself to. She had called at first, left messages, kept her voice light, careful not to sound like she needed anything. Just checking in. "I hope you're doing all right." No reply. Eventually, the silence stretched long enough that it felt intentional. She stopped calling after that. Not all at once, just less. Then not at all. A car door slammed nearby, pulling her back to the present. The sharp sound echoed briefly across the lot, then faded. She rubbed her hands together slowly, warming them with friction more than anything else. The house had been the last thing. She could still picture the front porch, the way the paint had chipped near the railing, the way the steps creaked in a familiar rhythm under her weight. She had believed, in a quiet way, that it was hers. That belief had lasted right up until the letter came. She didn't remember the exact words anymore, just the tone, formal, detached, as if it were addressing someone else entirely. Adjustments, obligations, necessary action. She had sat at the kitchen table with that letter in her hands for a long time, reading the same lines over and over, waiting for them to mean something different. They never did. After that, things moved faster. Boxes packed in a hurry, items set aside, then set aside again. Decisions made not by choice, but by what would fit. The storage unit had felt like a solution at the time. Temporary. Just until she figured things out. She could still hear the auctioneer's voice, rising and falling in a rhythm that didn't pause long enough for memory to settle. Strangers walking past her things, opening boxes, lifting objects she had once used without thinking. A lamp. A set of dishes. A coat she'd forgotten she owned. Handled. Judged. Sold. She had stood off to the side, hands folded, watching it happen as if it belonged to someone else. No one had asked her anything. No one needed to. The wind shifted again, brushing lightly against the side of the car. Marjorie opened her eyes and looked around the parking lot once more. It was fully morning now. Cars coming and going, people moving in steady lines. The world had found its pace. She was still sitting exactly where she had been. Nothing about it felt sudden. That was the truth of it. No single moment you could point to and say, "There." That's when everything changed. It had come in pieces. Quiet ones. So small at first, they didn't seem worth noticing. Until one day, there was nothing left to hold on to. She reached back again, almost without thinking, her fingers brushing the edge of the scarf wrapped around the Bible. It was the only thing in the car that hadn't passed through someone else's hands. The only thing she hadn't had to explain. She let her hand rest there for a moment. Then she pulled it back, folding it into her lap once more. Outside, someone laughed. The sound was brief, bright, gone in an instant. Marjorie sat still, watching the space where it had been, her expression unchanged. Not angry, not even surprised, just aware. As if she had already seen how this part of the story would go, Marjorie sat a while longer, watching the parking lot fill, then empty, then fill again. Patterns. That's what she noticed now. The same people at the same hours, the same movements, the same rhythm. It made things easier. Predictable. Eventually, she reached for the door handle and stepped out of the car. The cold hit her face sharp and immediate, waking her in a way the coffee never could. She pulled her coat tighter around her and closed the door gently, careful not to draw attention. The car didn't lock anymore. It didn't matter. There was nothing in it anyone would want. She walked toward the far edge of the lot, where a narrow strip of shrubs lined the sidewalk. Beyond that, a row of older buildings, brick, worn, the kind of places people passed without noticing. She moved slowly, not because she was tired, but because there was no reason to hurry. Inside the grocery store, the lights were bright. Too bright. She stepped in anyway, keeping her head slightly lowered, her pace steady. Not fast, not slow. Just enough. That was something she had learned. Too slow, and people looked at you. Too fast, and they did too. There was a middle ground where you became part of the background. That's where she stayed. She picked up a small basket near the entrance, though she didn't need it, and walked through the aisles as if she had a list in mind. Her eyes moved over the shelves, not searching for anything in particular, just giving her hands something to do. At the bakery counter, the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Warm, soft, familiar. She paused there a moment longer than she meant to, then kept walking. At the back of the store, near the restrooms, she set the basket down quietly beside a stack of empty boxes and slipped inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The mirror above the sink caught her reflection before she was ready for it. She looked the same. That was the strange part. Her hair pinned back the way she'd worn it for years. Her coat, still good, still clean if you didn't look too closely. Her face, older, yes, but not unrecognizable. She could have been anyone. That was the point. She turned on the faucet and let the water run until it warmed slightly. Then she washed her hands, slowly, carefully, as if the act itself mattered. She cupped the water and pressed it lightly against her face, then reached for the paper towels and patted her skin dry. No rush, no wasted motion. She adjusted her collar in the mirror, smoothing it down with both hands. "All right," she said softly, not quite looking at herself. When she stepped back out into the store, she didn't pick up the basket again. She walked straight toward the exit, blending into the small crowd moving in and out. No one stopped her. No one noticed. Outside, the air had warmed just enough to soften the edge of the cold. She stood near the entrance for a moment, letting the warmth from inside linger on her skin before it faded. Across the street, a diner sat on the corner. Narrow windows, a neon sign that buzzed faintly even in daylight. She crossed over, timing it with the light, moving with the others so she didn't stand out. Inside, the diner was half full. A few people at the counter, a couple in a booth near the window. She slid into a seat at the far end, near the wall. "Coffee?" the waitress asked, already reaching for the pot. "Yes, ma'am," Marjorie said. Her voice came out steady. The mug was set in front of her, the coffee poured without ceremony. Marjorie reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a few coins, setting them carefully on the counter. "That'll do," the waitress said with a small nod, before moving on. Marjorie wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her fingers. She didn't drink right away, just held it. Time stretched in places like this. That was the value. She took a small sip, then set the cup back down and looked out the window. People passed by. Cars moved through the intersection, the same rhythm just from a different angle. She stayed there a long time, an hour, maybe more. No one asked her to leave. No one asked her anything at all. That was the balance. A cup of coffee bought you space, bought you time. By midday, the diner had filled, then emptied again. Marjorie stood, leaving the mug half full, and walked back out into the light. The rest of the day moved in small pieces. A bench in the park where she sat without sitting too long. A stop at the public library, not to read, but to be somewhere warm and quiet. She kept to the edges of rooms, the corners where people didn't gather. She watched, listened, learned. Which places closed early, which ones didn't, which doors stayed unlocked longer than they should, which faces were kind, which ones weren't. It became a kind of map. Not on paper. In her mind. By evening, the air had turned colder again. She made her way back to the parking lot, her steps slower now, the day settling into her bones. The car sat where she had left it, unmoved, unchanged. She opened the door and climbed inside, pulling it shut behind her. The quiet returned instantly, wrapping around her like something familiar. For a moment, she just sat there, letting the silence settle. Then, without thinking, she began to hum. Soft, low. A tune she didn't quite remember learning. It came from somewhere older than the rest of it. Her fingers moved absently against her coat sleeve, keeping time. The Bible rested in the back seat, wrapped in its faded scarf, untouched. But closer now somehow. Marjorie leaned her head back and closed her eyes, the hum continuing under her breath as the last light of the day slipped away beyond the windshield. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, she stayed still, learning little by little how to disappear. Night settled over the parking lot in layers. First the fading light, then the hum of the last customers leaving. Then the long, quiet stretch where even the carts stopped rattling. Marjorie sat with her coat pulled close, her breath faint in the cooling air. The hum had stopped too. At some point, she noticed that. She opened her eyes. The tune had been one her grandmother used to hum in the kitchen years ago. She hadn't thought about it in a long time, not until recently. Now it came and went without asking. She turned her head slightly, looking into the back seat. The scarf hadn't moved, still folded the same way, still wrapped tight around the shape beneath it. She studied it for a moment, then looked away. It wasn't hunger that made her restless. It wasn't even the cold. It was something else. Something quieter. The kind of feeling that didn't belong to the body so much as it did to memory. She shifted in her seat, pulling her knees in slightly, and reached for the coffee cup, empty now. She set it aside and rubbed her hands together, then pressed them between her knees for warmth. Across the lot, the store lights dimmed one by one. Closing time. The last employee stepped out, locking the doors behind him, pulling his jacket tight as he crossed toward his car. His footsteps echoed lightly, then disappeared. Silence settled in. Marjorie let her head fall back against the seat. She could stay like this. She had for days now. Days that didn't feel like days so much as one long stretch of waiting. Waiting for what? She couldn't have said. Her eyes drifted closed again, then opened. The scarf. She looked at it again, longer this time. There was no reason for it to feel different. It had been there all along. But something about it wasn't the same. She reached back slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the fabric. The motion felt deliberate, as if she were crossing some line she hadn't noticed before. The scarf came loose easier than she expected. She paused, holding it in both hands. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar, old wood, something clean and dry. She unwrapped it halfway, then stopped. Her breath caught, not sharply, just enough to notice. She hadn't opened it in years. Not since. She couldn't remember exactly when. Before the house, before the marriage ended. Before things began to slip. She swallowed and looked down at the book in her hands. The cover was worn smooth, the edges softened with age. A faint crease ran across the front, like it had been bent once and never quite returned to shape. She turned it over slowly. The spine held, still solid, still intact. Her thumb rested along the edge of the pages. Thin paper. She could feel it through the cover. For a moment, she almost set it back. Wrapped it again. Put it where it had been. But her hand didn't move. Instead, she opened it. The sound was soft, a faint creak, like something unused for a long time finally giving way. The pages inside had yellowed, the ink faded just enough to blur at the edges. She flipped past the first few pages without reading, her fingers careful, almost hesitant. Then she stopped. There, near the front. A page she didn't remember. Not exactly. Names were written there. Dates. A list of people she recognized in pieces. Family, distant relatives. Connections she hadn't thought about in years. Her eyes moved slowly down the page, line by line. Then they stopped. Her name, Marjorie Ellison. The letters were written in a careful hand, not her mother's, not her own. Different. Older. She leaned forward slightly, bringing the page closer to the dim light from the dashboard. There was something beside it. Not just the name. Words. Faint, but clear enough to read. For Marjorie, when you have nowhere left to go. She blinked. Once. Then again. Her thumb pressed gently against the edge of the page as if to steady it. The words didn't change, didn't blur, didn't fade. They stayed exactly as they were. Her breath slowed, then caught in the middle of her chest. Not fear. Something else. She traced the line lightly with her finger, following the curve of the letters. Careful, deliberate. She knew that handwriting, or rather, she recognized the feeling of it. A memory surfaced, quiet but firm. A man sitting at a table, head bent slightly forward, writing something slowly, with intention, not rushing, never rushing. Her grandfather. She hadn't thought of him in years. Not properly. Only in passing. In the way people remember things they were told not to think about too much. Unreliable. That's what her mother had called him. A man who never stayed in one place long enough to matter. Marjorie looked down at the page again. The writing didn't match that description. It was steady. Measured. Certain. She read the line again. For Marjorie, when you have nowhere left to go. Her throat tightened, just slightly. Not enough to cry. Not enough to break. Just enough to feel it. She leaned back slowly in the seat, the Bible still open in her hands. The car was quiet. The night stretched around her, still and empty. But something had shifted. Not outside. Inside. A small movement, barely noticeable, like the first step of something she hadn't planned to take. Her eyes drifted back to the page. The words didn't feel like memory. They felt placed, waiting. Her pulse quickened, just a little. Not from fear, from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something unfamiliar, something that didn't quite have a name yet. She closed the book halfway, then stopped, opened it again. Looked once more at her name, at the line beside it, then sat there, holding it in both hands, as if the weight of it mattered more than anything else she owned. Outside, the wind moved softly across the empty lot. Inside, Marjorie Ellison didn't move at all. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't entirely still. The words sat with her, not loud, not demanding, just present. She lowered her gaze again, back to the page, as if it might shift if she looked away too long. The ink had faded in places, but the line beside her name remained clear. Careful, intentional. It hadn't been written by accident. She knew that much. Marjorie adjusted the book in her lap, pulling it closer to the dim glow of the dashboard light. Her fingers moved more deliberately now, less hesitant. She turned the page slowly, then another. Her breathing had changed. She noticed that. A little quicker, a little shallower. Not panic, focus. She flipped back to the front again, studying the handwriting, the names above hers, the dates. She leaned forward slightly, narrowing her eyes. There were differences, subtle but there. Some of the older names had been written in a thicker line, the ink darker, pressed harder into the page. Others, later ones, were lighter, fading. Her name sat somewhere in between. Not the newest, not the oldest. She reached down to the passenger seat and picked up her coat, slipping her hand into the inside pocket. After a moment, she pulled out a small bundle of folded papers, worn soft at the edges. She unfolded them carefully. Birthday cards. 3 of them. All from years ago. She hadn't meant to keep them. They had just stayed. She spread them out across the steering wheel, smoothing each one with her palm. The handwriting inside them was familiar. Not from memory exactly, but from feeling. She looked back at the Bible, then at the cards, back again. Her eyes moved between them, slower now, comparing, tracing the shapes of letters, the way certain strokes curved, the way the lines leaned slightly to the right. It wasn't exact. Time had changed it. But the hand was the same. She sat back, the realization settling in quietly. Her grandfather. The thought didn't land all at once. It came in pieces, the way his name had sounded when her mother said it. Short, dismissive, as if it didn't carry weight. A man who drifted. A man who didn't stay. A man who couldn't be counted on. Marjorie looked down at the page again. The writing didn't drift. It didn't wander. It held. She turned another page, then another. Nothing. Just scripture. Margins worn thin, Occasional marks, lines drawn beside passages, small notes she couldn't quite read anymore. She slowed. If the message had been placed there, then it hadn't been random. It had been meant to be found. That thought changed the way she looked at the book. Her fingers moved more carefully now, pressing lightly along the inner spine, feeling, not just turning. The paper was thin, too thin to hide much. But the cover. She shifted her grip, turning the Bible sideways. Her thumb ran along the inside edge of the back cover. Something caught. Not a sound. A difference. She paused, then pressed again. There. A slight ridge. Almost nothing. If she hadn't been looking for it, she would have missed it. Marjorie leaned forward, bringing the book closer. Her fingers worked slowly along the seam where the cover met the pages. The leather there had softened over time, the edge worn just enough to give. She slipped her fingernail under it. Carefully. The seam lifted a fraction. Her breath caught. She didn't rush, didn't pull, just eased it open, bit by bit. Something inside shifted. A faint crackle. Paper. Old, brittle. She stopped, holding still, listening. Nothing else moved. The night outside remained quiet. She slid 2 fingers inside the gap and felt it, thin, folded, tucked deep between the lining and the binding. Her hand trembled slightly as she worked it free. Not from fear. From the weight of it. The paper came loose slowly, resisting at first, then slipping out all at once. She held it there in her hand, not opening it yet. It was smaller than she expected, folded into a tight square, the edges worn soft, the corners rounded from time. She turned it over. No writing on the outside, nothing to explain it. Just waiting. Marjorie rested it on her lap. For a moment, she didn't touch it. Her eyes drifted back to the Bible, still open beside her. Her name. The message. When you have nowhere left to go. She looked at the folded paper again. A map. The thought came before she opened it. She didn't know why, but it felt right. Her fingers moved to the edge, unfolding one corner, then another. The paper resisted at the creases, stiff with age, then flattened slowly as she opened it fully. It wasn't neat. Not like something printed. The lines were hand-drawn, slightly uneven, faded in places, darker in others. She leaned closer. There were no street names, no numbers. Just shapes. A long curve that might have been a road. A jagged line, maybe a creek. Small markings scattered along the way. And near the center, a symbol. A triangle drawn with careful lines. A single mark through it. Marjorie frowned slightly, studying it. Her finger hovered above the page, not quite touching. She traced the lines slowly, following the path from one edge to the other. Her lips moved faintly, sounding out the shapes as if they might translate into something she could understand. There were words. A few, faded almost to nothing. She leaned closer, squinting. Ridge. The rest was harder to make out. She tilted the paper toward the light, shifting it until the ink caught just enough to read. Red Hollow Ridge. She whispered it aloud. The sound felt strange in the quiet car, like it didn't belong there. She said it again, slower, testing it. Red Hollow Ridge. The name didn't mean anything to her. No memory attached to it. No place she could picture. And yet, it didn't feel random. Her eyes moved back across the map. The lines, the marks, the triangle. This hadn't been drawn for anyone else. It had been drawn for her. Her chest tightened slightly, not in fear, in recognition. She sat there for a long time, the map open across her lap, the Bible beside her, the words still echoing in her mind. For Marjorie, when you have nowhere left to go. Outside, the parking lot remained empty. The store dark now, the world quiet in that late hour where everything seems paused. Inside the car, something had shifted again. Not just a feeling this time, a direction. She folded the map carefully, retracing the same lines, pressing the creases back into place. Then she tucked it into her coat pocket. Close. Not hidden, kept. Her hand rested there a moment longer than necessary. Then she reached for the Bible, closing it gently, wrapping it again in the faded scarf, but not as tightly as before. She set it beside her, within reach. Her eyes moved forward, through the windshield, into the dark stretch of road beyond the parking lot. She didn't know where Red Hollow Ridge was. She didn't know how far or what she would find there. But for the first time in a long while, the stillness had somewhere to go. Marjorie didn't sleep much that night. She leaned back in the driver's seat, eyes closed, but her mind kept circling the same shape. Lines on paper, a name spoken twice, a place that didn't belong to anything she knew. Red Hollow Ridge. By morning, the sky had turned a pale, washed-out blue. The cold had crept deeper into the car. Her hands felt stiff as she flexed her fingers, then reached into her coat pocket. The folded map was still there. She pulled it out again, slower this time, unfolded it carefully across her lap, smoothing the creases with the flat of her hand. In daylight, the lines looked clearer. Not clearer in detail, but more certain. She traced the long curve again, the bend in the line that might have been a road, the jagged shape of the creek, the triangle. Her eyes moved between the map and the empty lot outside. It didn't match anything here. That much was obvious. She reached forward and grabbed a receipt from the dashboard, flipping it over. With a pen from the glove compartment, she tried to redraw what she saw. Not perfect, but close enough. The act of copying slowed her thoughts, made it feel real in a way staring at it hadn't. When she finished, she sat back and looked at both. The map. Her version. They matched. That mattered. She folded the receipt and tucked it into her coat, separate from the original. A habit. Don't rely on one thing. Her eyes drifted to the steering wheel. The car wasn't going anywhere. That part hadn't changed. She looked back down at the map, then at her hands, still steady, still capable. The thought came quietly. You don't have to stay here. She didn't answer it right away. Instead, she opened her wallet. 3 bills, some coins, not much else. She counted it once, then again. Same number. She closed it slowly. Across the lot, the grocery store doors opened again. Another day starting, another cycle repeating. She watched it for a while. People coming and going, always moving. She had been still long enough to understand what that felt like. Now something else pressed at her. Not urgency, not panic. Just movement. Marjorie reached into the back seat and pulled the small suitcase forward, set it on the passenger seat, unzipped it halfway. Inside, Everything had already been reduced to what mattered. Clothes, a small pouch of toiletries, the bundle of papers, nothing extra, nothing left to sort. That made the decision simpler. Or maybe it just made it unavoidable. She reached into her coat again and pulled out the silver locket. It rested in her palm, catching the light just enough to show its age. The chain had been repaired once, poorly, but it held. She turned it over, opened it. Inside, a small photograph, faded, edges curled. She looked at it for a moment longer than she expected, then closed it. Carefully. Her fingers tightened slightly around it. Not hesitation. Acknowledgement. She slipped it into her pocket and stepped out of the car. The air felt sharper this morning, clearer. She walked across the lot, past the entrance, toward a small storefront 2 blocks down, a place she had noticed before, but never needed. Until now. The sign read, "Coins and Collectibles." The bell above the door rang softly as she stepped inside. The man behind the counter looked up briefly, then back down at what he was working on. "Morning," he said, without much interest. Marjorie nodded. "Morning." She approached the counter slowly, pulling the locket from her pocket and setting it down between them. The man glanced at it, picked it up, turned it over once. "Silver," he said, "not new." "No," Marjorie replied. He opened it, looked at the picture, then closed it again. "I can give you 40. She didn't react. Just nodded once. "That's fine. No negotiation, no story." He counted out the bills, set them on the counter. She picked them up, folded them, and slipped them into her wallet. The locket stayed where it was. She didn't look back at it. Outside, the air felt different. Not warmer. Just lighter. She walked back toward the parking lot, her steps steady, her pace unchanged. When she reached the car, she paused beside it for a moment. Her hand rested on the door. She looked at the interior one last time. The seat where she had slept. The dashboard where the Bible had rested. The back seat where everything she owned had been arranged just so. It had been enough. For a while. She opened the door and reached in, gathering what she needed. The suitcase, the blanket, the Bible. She left the rest. Closed the door. The car stayed where it was, unmoved, unclaimed. She turned away from it without locking it, without looking back again. The bus station sat 3 blocks down. She had seen it before, never needed it. Now it felt like the next line on the map. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. A few people sat scattered across plastic chairs. A television mounted in the corner played something with the sound turned low. Marjorie stepped up to the counter. "Where you headed?" the clerk asked, barely looking up. She hesitated. Just a second. Then reached into her coat and unfolded her copy of the map. Her finger rested lightly on the place name she had written. "Nearest stop to Red Hollow Ridge," she said. The clerk frowned slightly, typing something into the computer. "Closest I can get you is about 40 miles out," he said. "After that, you're on your own." Marjorie nodded. "That's fine." He named the price. She counted out the money. Still enough. Barely. He handed her the ticket. Platform number scribbled in the corner. Departure time circled in pen. She took it, folded it once, and slipped it into her pocket beside the map. When she sat down to wait, her hands rested quietly in her lap. Not empty, not uncertain, just ready. Outside, a bus pulled in, brakes hissing as it came to a stop. The door opened with a soft mechanical sound. Marjorie stood, picked up her suitcase, and walked toward it without hesitation. The bus door folded open with a soft hiss. Marjorie climbed the steps carefully, one hand on the rail, the other holding the strap of her suitcase. The driver glanced at her ticket, tore the edge without a word, and stepped aside. "Second stop's yours," he said. "Don't miss it." "I won't," she replied. She moved down the aisle and chose a seat near the middle, not too close to the front, not too far back, a place where she could see without being seen too much. The seat beside her stayed empty. She set the suitcase at her feet and held the Bible in her lap, her fingers resting lightly against the scarf wrapped around it. Outside, the station slid slowly out of view as the bus pulled away, the engine settling into a steady rhythm. For a while, she just watched. Buildings gave way to smaller roads. Storefronts faded into open stretches. The movement outside felt unfamiliar, not because she hadn't traveled before, but because this time there was no return in mind. She reached into her coat and pulled out the folded map, opened it just enough to see the lines. She followed them with her finger as the bus moved forward, matching nothing and everything at once. The hours passed quietly. At one stop, a man boarded carrying a duffel bag and sat across the aisle. At another, a woman got off, leaving behind the faint smell of perfume and something floral. Marjorie didn't speak. She didn't need to. The driver called out the second stop, just as the sun tilted low in the sky. "This is you." The bus slowed, pulling off onto a narrow shoulder of road that seemed to lead nowhere in particular. Marjorie stood, gathered her things, and stepped down onto the gravel. The bus door closed behind her. The engine roared once. Then it was gone. The silence that followed felt larger than the one she had left behind. No buildings, no storefronts. Just a long stretch of road cutting through open land, the wind moving steadily through dry grass on either side. Marjorie stood there a moment, adjusting her grip on the suitcase, letting her eyes take in what was around her. Nothing obvious. That didn't surprise her. She reached into her coat and pulled out the map again. Unfolded it fully this time, held it up against the landscape. The line on the map curved slightly to the left. The road in front of her did the same. She turned slowly, scanning the horizon. There. A break in the grass. Subtle. Just a faint shift in color and texture, like something had once passed through it often enough to leave a trace. A path. Not a road. Not anymore. But something. She started walking. The suitcase rolled unevenly behind her, its small wheels catching on stones, forcing her to lift it more often than she would have liked. After a while, she stopped pulling it and carried it instead, switching hands when her grip tightened. The wind picked up as she moved farther from the main road. Colder, sharper. It pressed against her coat, pushing lightly, as if testing her balance. She didn't stop. The map stayed in her hand, her eyes moving between it and the ground ahead. The lines made more sense here. The curve, the spacing between marks. She came to a shallow dip in the land. A dry creek bed. She stepped down into it carefully, her boots crunching against loose gravel, then climbed the other side. She paused at the top, looked back. The road she had come from was already harder to see. That didn't matter. She turned forward again. The map showed a bend. A turn. She walked another stretch, longer this time, the land rising gently beneath her feet. Then she saw it. At first, it didn't look like anything. just a break in the horizon, a darker line against the fading light. But as she moved closer, details began to form. A fence post, leaning slightly to one side. Gray with age. She stopped in front of it, reached out, ran her fingers along the surface. The wood was rough, worn smooth in places where weather had taken its time. She looked back down at the map. The mark was there. Small, almost overlooked, but placed. She stepped past it. The ground changed. Less open now, more contained. A ridge rose ahead of her, not steep, but enough to block what lay beyond. She followed the line along its base, just as the map suggested. Her breath had grown heavier, not from exhaustion, but from something building inside her chest. Anticipation, or doubt. She wasn't sure which. The wind shifted again, quieter here, as if the ridge held it back. She walked a little farther, then stopped. The land opened. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough. A small hollow tucked behind the ridge, hidden. If you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't have seen it. Marjorie stood still. Her eyes moved slowly across the space. There, near the far side, a structure. Small, weathered, but standing. A homestead. She didn't move right away, didn't rush forward. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her suitcase. Her breath slowed. The map hung loosely in her other hand. She looked down at it, then back up at the place in front of her. They matched. Not perfectly. Time had changed things, but enough to know. She took one step forward, then another, each one careful, measured, as if the ground itself might shift if she moved too quickly. The closer she got, the more details came into focus. A roof, worn but holding. A window, one pane cracked. A door closed, no movement, no sound. Just the quiet presence of something that had been waiting longer than she could measure. She stopped again, a few feet away now. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She reached out, not to touch it yet, but close enough to feel the space between. For a moment, she said nothing, did nothing, just stood there, because something in her understood that stepping closer would make it real. And real meant it could be lost. So she stayed where she was, balanced between what she had found and what she was still afraid to believe. Marjorie stood there a long time. The wind had quieted inside the hollow, softened by the curve of the land. The silence felt different here, not empty, just held. She tightened her grip on the suitcase and took another step forward, then another. The ground beneath her boots was firmer now, less scattered with loose gravel. Someone had walked this path once, many times maybe. The faint outline of it remained, pressed into the earth by years that had long since passed. She stopped at the door. It was plain wood, weathered but not broken. The handle was old metal, dulled by time, cool to the touch when she reached out. Her hand rested there, still, waiting for something to tell her what to do next. Nothing came. So she turned it. The door gave with a quiet resistance, the hinges creaking softly as it opened inward. The air inside was cooler. Still, carrying the faint scent of dust, dry wood, and something else, something older. Not unpleasant, just settled. Marjorie stepped inside. The light followed her through the doorway, stretching across the floor in a long, pale line. The room was small, One space divided more by purpose than walls. A table near the center. 2 chairs. A narrow bed against the far wall. Shelves along one side, holding a few scattered items. Tools, a tin cup, a folded cloth. Nothing arranged for display. Everything placed for use. She set her suitcase down near the door, not closing it behind her just yet. The quiet pressed in gently. Her footsteps sounded louder than they should have. She moved slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Dust had settled over everything in a thin, even layer, but it wasn't thick. Not abandoned in the way she had expected. More like paused. She stepped toward the table. Her fingers brushed lightly across its surface, leaving a clean line through the dust. The wood beneath was solid, well made. Her eyes moved across the room. The bed was simple. A frame, a thin mattress rolled tight at one end. A blanket folded carefully on top, edges aligned. Not thrown. Not forgotten. Left. She turned toward the shelves. There were small things there. A hammer, a coil of wire, a jar with a lid screwed tight. Each one worn but intact oozed. Maintained. She reached for the jar, lifted it slightly, then set it back. Her movements were careful now, not from fear, from attention, looking, not just seeing. The map in her pocket pressed lightly against her coat. She remembered the triangle, the mark. This place. She turned slowly, letting her eyes move again across the room. There had to be more. Not hidden, exactly, but placed. Her gaze settled on the far wall, near the bed. There. A small wooden box sat on a narrow shelf, pushed slightly back, as if it belonged there but wasn't meant to be noticed first. She stepped toward it, reached up, pulled it down. It was lighter than she expected. She set it on the table and opened it. Inside were papers. Folded, stacked. Not neatly, but not carelessly either. She lifted the first one. A letter. The paper had yellowed with age, the edges soft, the fold lines deep. Her name was written on the front. Marjorie. No last name, just her first. The handwriting was the same. She knew it now. She unfolded it slowly. The words inside were steady, clear, written without hesitation. She read. The room seemed to narrow around her as her eyes moved across the lines. He wrote about her. Not in memory, not in past tense. In present. As if she existed in his life, even when she had not been there. Her chest tightened. She read another, then another. Each one dated, spread across years, decades. Her name repeated, again and again. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the letters down, one by one, forming a small stack in front of her. She turned back to the box. There was more. A ledger, thicker, bound at the spine. She opened it. Inside, rows of writing. Careful columns. Dates. Notes. Her eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed. There. Her name. Again. Written in the margin beside certain entries. Not all, but enough. She leaned closer, tracing one line with her finger. Supplies. Wood. Repairs. Each note small, practical. But beside them, her name. Not as ownership. As intention. She swallowed. The room felt different now. Not empty. Not quiet. Full. Of something she hadn't expected. She closed the ledger gently and looked back at the letters. Her mind moved through the pieces. Her mother's voice, firm, certain. He couldn't be counted on. He never stayed. He wasn't worth knowing. Marjorie looked around the room again. At the table, the bed, the tools. Everything here had been built, maintained, kept. Not by someone who drifted, but by someone who stayed. Her hands pressed lightly against the edge of the table. She steadied herself. The truth didn't arrive in a single moment. It unfolded. Line by line. Page by page. He hadn't left. He had been kept away. The thought settled slowly. She didn't resist it, didn't question it. The evidence sat in front of her. In ink. In wood. In every detail of the place around her. Her grandfather had built this. Not for himself. For her. Her breath caught, deeper this time. She sat down in one of the chairs, the wood creaking softly beneath her weight. The letters lay open in front of her. Her name, over and over, spoken in a voice she had never heard clearly until now. The story she had carried all her life shifted, not breaking, just changing shape. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, her hands covering her mouth for a moment. Her eyes closed. Not to escape, to hold the feeling steady. When she opened them again, the room remained the same, but she didn't. She reached for the letters once more, picked one up, read it again. Slower this time, letting each word land where it needed to. Outside, the wind moved faintly across the ridge. Inside, Marjorie Ellison sat at a table that had been waiting for her longer than she had known, and began, piece by piece, to understand what had always been there. The letters didn't ask anything of her. They didn't explain themselves. They just stayed, quiet, steady, patient in a way people rarely are. She ran her fingers over her name again, not the way it had been said all her life. Not as something carried out of duty or spoken in passing, but written, measured, kept. Outside, the wind moved softly along the ridge, brushing past the door like it had done for years, for decades, for all the time she hadn't been here to hear it. He had built this without knowing if she'd ever come. Board by board, line by line. Not to be thanked, not to be seen. Just in case she needed it. Marjorie looked around the room again. The table, the bed, the small, careful choices that made a place livable. Nothing extra, nothing wasted. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was meant to hold. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been carrying. All those years, thinking there had been nothing left for her, that everything worth keeping had already slipped through her hands. And here it was. Not loud, not grand, but waiting. She reached for the Bible, still wrapped in the faded scarf, and set it gently on the table beside the letters. The map stayed folded inside her coat. Not because she needed it anymore, but because she understood it now. Some people don't leave you answers. They leave you a way to find them. Marjorie sat there a while longer, the quiet settling around her in a way that didn't feel empty anymore. Then she leaned back slightly, her eyes moving once more across the room that had been built for her before she ever knew she would need it. And for the first time in a long while, She didn't feel like she had arrived too late. She felt expected. So let me ask you this. If someone had quietly prepared a place for you all your life, would you even recognize it when you finally found it?